I now give the floor to the Attorney-General for his right of reply. You have the floor, Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, if I could be allowed some time to respond to a number of the specific issues that have been raised by members, in particular from the other side. There's quite a few comments that they've made. Mr. Speaker, sir, there's a lot of these matters that have been raised. In fact, we've traversed on those previously. But I just wanted to perhaps allay some concerns that were raised, unfounded as it may be. Mr. Speaker, sir, just to the notion of guarantees and how guarantees work, I think a couple of examples were used. I think the FBC example was used saying, $21 million guarantee was given and is still there. Well, obviously there's a debt of now $6 million. The debt has decreased from $21 million to $6 million. The guarantee will remain. But when we measure your contingent liabilities, you don't measure it as $21 million. Your contingent liability is only $6 million because there's only $6 million debt to pay. Just because you gave an original guarantee of $21 million and you've only got $6 million to pay, then you only measure $6 million. So again, there's a very unfortunate lack of understanding by the opposition, and they continue to talk about this. Mr. Speaker, sir, it's basic banking. If you give a guarantee to somebody for $21 million and there's a $21 million debt and they paid off the debt up to $6 million, your guarantee exposure is only $6 million. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Honourable Aseri Randrondro had asked a question about the split of the debt.
Order.
And unfortunately, he got some of the figures wrong. But I said this yesterday. The FNPF has 30% of the debt, which is $229 million. ADB has 18% of the debt, which is $134 million. FDB has 10% of the debt, which is $75 million. The German banks have $278 million, which is 36% of the debt, and 6% of the debt, the balance, is $47 million, which is owned by DAE, which are the lessor companies. So Honourable Randronda was saying, who else are we borrowing from? There's nobody else. There's no person sitting in a dark cloak, sitting in a corner, we're going to borrow the money from. This guarantee and the information provided, Mr. Speaker, sir, last year when we presented to Parliament, we gave a full disclosure on it. And if the members read the motion, the guarantee sum is not being increased. So therefore, that information is still valid, Mr. Speaker, sir. Of course, a few things have changed since then. For example, Fiji Airways has reduced its monthly recurring costs, which is now about $23 million, as opposed to $38 million. Honourable Tuisava was quoting some old figures and quoting, in fact, the CEO of FJ a number of months ago, last year. That situation obviously has changed. Mr. Speaker, sir, there's a lot of talk about, and again, we've discussed this so many times in the floor of this Parliament. And they're saying they're not anti-Fiji Airways. But Mr. Speaker, sir, even before the pandemic, when nobody heard about the pandemic, when we're talking about the Airbuses and various other things, Honourable Govok always used to go on about Qantas. They're not telling the full story on the floor of this Parliament. Why did the SVT government go to Qantas and say, bail us out? They're not addressing that issue. The reason why that arose was because the government in those days used to interfere with the management of the company. They enforced the appointment of a CEO who was incompetent, as a result of which Fiji Airways went down the gurgler. Oh. And then the SVT government went cap in hand to Qantas and said, guys, please bail us out. They said, sure, we'll increase our percentage of shareholding in the company. And by the way, it's not only 2 areas, there's about 14 areas of veto powers that Qantas has, or had, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I find it quite flabbergasting, Mr. Speaker, sir, that Honourable Gavoka says that they are going to decide our routes. And he seems to be taking that as acceptable. How can we call ourselves a national carrier when we as a country cannot decide where we're going to fly to? It will be decided by a private company. Qantas is not even owned by the Australian government or shares, a percent of shareholding. It's a private company that will determine the fate of this country with sovereign status as to where we're going to fly to. And they think it's acceptable. It is not acceptable, Mr. Speaker, sir. And let's not, band ourselves around and say we're the national carrier when you cannot control that fundamental decision-making power and ability. Mr. Speaker, sir, again they said, all these things, wonderful things used to happen in Qantas. When, Mr. Speaker, sir, Fiji Airways management became a lot more proactive, they found a number of the arrangements that Qantas used to enter on our behalf. For example, insurance premium, they were charging actually excess to us. When Fiji Airways went directly to London to negotiate, they were able to get better insurance premiums, reducing our costs. Same thing with engineering and various other areas. So let's not try and pontificate. Honourable Lithian Barabi obviously has now joined the fray, is now reading out about Qantas, what a wonderful organisation it is. Nobody's saying it is not a organisation that's functioning properly. It is a listed company. There's various requirements. You're part of a director of a company that's listed. There's a difference between listed companies and companies that are not listed. You should also know that. Mr. Speaker, sir, under the new arrangement with Fiji Airways, the staff had a share of the profit. That did not happen when Qantas was in control of Fiji Airways. Every year, the staff of Fiji Airways used to get a share of the profit until COVID came around. Even the departing staff actually got $1,000 from the previous year's share of the profits. The members on the other side seem to talk as if that no other airline terminated employment of their staff. Notwithstanding the fact that Air New Zealand received $900 million, 4,000 of their staff were terminated. 4,000. Notwithstanding that support. And here they are talking as if that no other airline in the world has done that. And Honourable Gyunim Barabi actually got caught out. When she read about this wonderful, epilogue on Qantas, she said, and the remaining staff will get this. Remaining from those who actually no longer had a job. Mr. Speaker, sir, the other point that I also wanted to highlight in that respect is that we have, this almost xenophobic attitude towards expatriates. And I highlighted this yesterday. No problem in getting, overseas expatriates for rugby, for football, for netball, but suddenly everybody has a problem when there's some expatriate appointed to some organization. No problem with expatriates in the tourism sector, no problem with expatriates in the banking sector, but suddenly when anything to do with government, it's a problem. Mr. Speaker, sir, for the information of the Honourable Gavoka, there are 4 expatriates in the 12 executive members of the Fiji Airways staff. All the pilots currently flying for Fiji Airways are all Fijians. Mr. Speaker, sir, the first pilots to go were all the expatriate pilots. They are the first ones to lose their job and their contracts. Mr. Speaker, sir, the reality of the matter is this, that this particular loan that we are talking about is not with the Fijian government. It's with various individual institutions. We are guaranteeing those loans. And Honourable Bulitavu quite correctly mentioned that by giving the government guarantee to these institutions, you are giving them a huge level of confidence to continue to support Fiji Airways. Financial institutions, whether it's FNPF, FDB, And the members of the opposition sounded as if that FNPF and FDB is giving them free money. No, they're not. FNPF has mortgage over all the shares. They've got mortgage over other properties. They are well secured. They now on top of that have government guarantees. The other organizations that have lent money or have leases have got guarantees. And this is why some of them have agreed to actually give a moratorium. In the same way the opposition is asking, and that some banks have done, given moratoriums to businesses in Fiji. Last year, moratorium till March of this year. It's exactly the same thing. And so as a result of this guarantee, they have the confidence to do that. And I think Honorable Bulitavu hit the nail on the head. Very simple logic to it all. Very simple logic. That you need to be prepared when you have the borders opened. You can't be scrambling around and saying, oh, things are better now, let's get it all. We've got to look beyond our noses. You have to look into the future. Of course, we can conjecture and say, what will happen if the pandemic stays? What will happen if it's there for the next 3 years? We are not God. But we have to be able to plan, and God helps those who help themselves. We have to be able to plan. We have to pre-position ourselves. Honorable Nawaikula said, maybe we should shut down Fiji Airways. So he shut down Fiji Airways. Honorable Minister Koea highlighted the fact about the foreign reserves that Fiji Airways brings to Fiji. 70% of all tourism arrivals in Fiji come on Fiji Airways. The hundreds of jobs, of course, that can be revitalized if Fiji Airways starts flying proper scheduled flights. If you have a foreign carrier, they'll have foreign crew. If you have a foreign carrier, the catering will be done by a foreign company, not by ATS. They all go on about ATS. Do they know if only Fiji Airways no longer flies, if Qantas comes, their food will be catered for in Sydney? No jobs for ATS. Permanently shut down. Finished. Do they understand the implications of it? Mr. Speaker, sir, there are numerous studies done in the Caribbean when they had the completely open skies policy, when all the national carriers were swallowed up by the large American companies. So the dollar retention from the tourism sector in some of the Caribbean countries, is only $1 or 1 cent in a dollar. $1 in $100. And one of the permutations you have to look at in the tourism sector, Mr. Speaker, says how much of the tourism spend do you actually remains within the country itself. And national carriers is one of the best ways of attracting that. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Honorable Tuisawau again went on Wanga Vuka and quoted a statement from the CEO which is outdated. As I highlighted, recurring cost is now $23 million because the costs have been brought down, they've been rationalized. We have also, Mr. Speaker, sir, that reduction has also taken place by reducing costs from the 2 to 4 year loan principal payment have been deferred, and aircraft rental deferrals, and also restructured the loans. Mr. Speaker, sir, the two aircraft that Honorable Tuisawau mentioned about Jet Airways. Jet Airways no longer operates. It's shut down. It's finished. Etihad had bought into Jet Airways. The airline is no longer in operation. Yes, there are two Jet Airways aircraft that was leased vis-a-vis Etihad. They are being returned early, Mr. Speaker, sir. They were leased originally to ensure about the A350, the overlap. They're being returned in June. We no longer need them. The Maxons are coming, so they are being returned. In respect of new leases of aircraft, Mr. Speaker, sir, you simply cannot just, lease an aircraft today and then say, oh, I don't want it tomorrow and give it away. There are penalties to be paid. It's not like me going and buying a hire purchase for a bed from Courts. This is an aircraft. It costs hundreds of millions of dollars. Mr. Speaker, sir, the other point that I also want to highlight again, they talked about loans. What are the terms? The term of the loans range from 7 to 15 years. I said this in my introduction. And as the amendment to the guarantee, it says that the guarantees will remain in place until the loans are paid in full. So within 7 years, some of the loans will be paid off. So the government exposure as far as the guarantee is concerned will come down by that amount of loan that's already been paid off. It's not going to be intergenerational, as they're trying to insinuate. It's not going to be intergenerational. It's the motion, Mr. Speaker, sir, says as long as the loan is paid off.
Order.
And the loan term, Mr. Speaker, sir,
Order.
the loan term, Mr. Speaker, sir, is the maximum is 15 years. That's not intergenerational. 15 years is not intergenerational. And, Mr. Speaker, sir, one of the things that they forget, which Honourable Bulitavu, I think, also alluded to, the Honourable Prime Minister said that also, if the borders open quicker than we expect it to, if air travel resumes to the scheduled flights, then obviously the capacity of Fiji Airways to repay the loans is hastened. And they can do those payments. Mr. Speaker, sir, the other point that I wanted to talk about, they said don't talk about Australia and New Zealand, but Honourable Biman went on about New Zealand debt to GDP ratio. They talked about the incentives that Air New Zealand gave, but they've given all this assistance, but he also did not talk about the fact that 4,000 of the Air New Zealand staff have been fired, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, the other point that I also wanted to make was in respect of Honourable Prasad made a very flabbergasting statement. He said that, if the 9 years of straight growth was true, then people would not run out of money. Australia, Mr. Speaker, sir, has had 23 years of straight growth, albeit 1%, 2%, nonetheless 23 years of straight growth. As soon as COVID-19 hit, they had people who lost their jobs. They had people who had to be assisted. The government went out and borrowed lots of money, so the logic is not there. Any basic economist would tell you that when you talk about growth, it's about growing the pie. It does not necessarily mean that the government is, accumulating vast amounts of gold. If that was the case, Australia with 23 years of growth would not have to go out and borrow money from the market. It's so fundamental. And this kind of pedestrian analysis, Mr. Speaker, sir, is unbecoming of somebody who calls themselves an economist. Mr. Speaker, sir, the reality is that we have somebody else mentioned about, Fiji Airways is insolvent. I've highlighted this so many times, Mr. Speaker, sir. ADB has lent money for the first time to a private entity. ADB engaged BNP Paribas, which is a French aviation expert analysis company, Mr. Speaker, sir. If they thought that Fiji Airways was insolvent, they would not have lent the money. Very basic, Mr. Speaker, sir. And this is, Mr. Speaker, sir, this is the private sector arm of ADB, not the ones that gives loans to governments on concessional basis. This is the private sector arm, Mr. Speaker, sir, of ADB. The other point, Mr. Speaker, sir, that I wanted to highlight is that the opposition, Honourable Prasad, Honourable Nico Nawaikola, all of this go on about this, saying that, economy is mismanaged, financial management is not there. For the first time in Fijian history, post-independence, we have New Zealand and Australia giving direct budget support, which means they give money to the government, saying, here's $40 million, whatever it is, you spend as you think it is worth your while. In which areas? Sometimes they may say, okay, out of the 40 million, can you spend or direct 10 million into, social welfare, whatever it is. But the rest you spend. Mr. Speaker, sir, for us to be able to get direct budget support, we have to, the Australian system, assessment is called the Assessment of National System, ANS. We have to meet that criteria before Australia will actually give you direct budget support. Under no other government has Australia and New Zealand given direct budget support. It's a fact. It's a fact. Please check it. It's the first time they're doing it. If we were running some dodgy show out here as they try and portray, they would not be giving us direct budget support because their mode of assistance has always been to give to NGOs or for a particular project. Not for it to go into government consolidated fund because they do not trust the management. Now they have that level of trust. So please look at third-party validation. Don't just sit here and just, negate everything, notwithstanding the fact that the facts are staring in your face. Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Honorable Prasad said, we are like drunks in a nightclub, spending money for the past number of years. Mr. Speaker, sir, we are like drunks spending money in a nightclub. Mr. Speaker, sir, in the past number of years, and Honorable Salote Rondrondo hopefully will appreciate this, never before in Fiji's history did rural pregnant women get food vouchers when they were pregnant. Never before, Mr. Speaker, sir, did disabled people get an allowance. Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, never before did we get micro-enterprises been given the type of support that we are currently giving them. Never before, of course we had rural electrification before, water connectivity before, but the rapid rate of rural electrification, the rapid rate of water connectivity, the rapid rate of tar sealing roads in rural areas, Hibiscus Highway, Buddha Bay, the Monasavu Neta series, Sawani Seria Road, the hydro dam that's been built in Nandarivatu, electricity connectivity. Mr. Speaker, sir, the point being, these monies have been spent to ensure that there's a rapid rate of development and connectivity. The type of electronic and telecommunications connectivity that happened in Fiji in the past number of years. That's why we had the growth rate. Because it feeds into that, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, and I again come back to the point. Because we had 9 years of growth, it does not mean that because you have a pandemic, everything will still be hunky-dory. Like all countries have seen. Look at the level of debt raising that other countries are doing. Mr. Speaker, sir, the last point that I wanted to make is that there was an issue raised about how did we come up with the 15% fee. Mr. Speaker, sir, the 15% fee is based on an independent assessment by BNP Paribas of the implied value the government guarantees of $455 million created for Fiji Airways. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, sir, and it's a fact, that Fiji Airways would not have obtained new loans in the restructure and the reprofiling of existing loans in a global pandemic, in particular when the aviation industry has been hit so hard, without government guarantees. That's a fact. This is why most of the governments that we're talking about, even in the Pacific, Tahiti, New Caledonia, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, they've all had government assistance. In our case, we could have gone for the budget and said, let's give Fiji Airways $300 million, $400 million. Is that what they wanted? Would have affected our bottom line. Right off, take it off from the top. But we went by way of guarantee, which means there's no call on your finances now. And Mr. Speaker says, secondly, there's no way Fiji Airways could obtain the long-term loans at the low interest rate achieved. It varies from 3 to 5%, or the restructured reprofiling at a revision of the existing interest rates varying from 3 to 6%. BNP Paribas therefore believe that the implied value of the guarantees is a 3 to 4% interest saving on every loan. Because if the guarantee was not there, your loan would have been increased the interest rate by 3 to 4% for the remaining term of the loan. They have calculated the implied interest benefit and determined its net present value. The 3% implied interest saving has an implied NPV benefit of $132 million on total loans of $649 million. That is 20.4% for Fiji Airways. Similarly, the 4% implied interest saving has an implied NPV benefit of $175 million on total loans of $649 million. That is 27%. Therefore, the 15% is a reasonable fee. The question that was asked was that, how will Fiji Airways pay that? They need to pay that. We obviously can come to some arrangement with them, but the shareholders need to know. None of the other shareholders have come to the party. Qantas has not come to the party. New Zealand or the other smaller countries that own it, they obviously don't have the capacity to do so. I again reiterate the position. Qantas is not participating in the board meetings through their own choice. The CEO of Fiji Airways has meetings with them. Narendra left Fiji Airways because he was bypassed the CEO. That's why he went to Qantas. Qantas realized how good it was and they snapped him up. That's how you lose good people, when they're not appointed to OMRS. Mr. Speaker, sir, the reality is that we are now positioning ourselves for the future. I would urge all members to support this. It's an amendment. The guarantee sum has not been amended. The term of the guarantee has been amended to the time when the loans will be paid off. The maximum term of the loans for any one of those loans is 15 years. And God willing, with the vaccination rate that's taking place in Fiji, as the Honourable Prime Minister highlighted earlier on, we now literally have thousands of people now being done on a daily or weekly basis. And hopefully with Australia and New Zealand opening up too, we've had some overtures from other countries where they want to do what they call mutual vaccination recognition, that we recognize their vaccination program, they recognize ours. That's why it's very important to have integrity within the identification and the verification of those people who get vaccinated. And if there's mutual recognition, then travel can actually open up. And that's what we need to do. And once travel opens up, we need to ensure that our carrier will be there, because that brings a lot of benefit to us. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I hope that all the members will support this particular motion. Thank you, sir.
I thank the Attorney-General and Minister for Economy, Civil Service and Communication for his reply.